Hey folks, good morning. My name is Seth Bridges. I'm one of the founders of Rival IQ, and I'm happy and excited to welcome you to this episode of the Data Driven Marketer. Today, we don't have a special guest. You just get me. I know we usually do an interview style format here on this show, but once a year, in coordination with the launch of our big annual social media benchmark report, we like to hit pause on the interview series a little bit and spend this time with you going through some of the big takeaways that we had in this report. So I'm happy to be here doing that with you today. Now, of course, as you know, we like to underpromise and overdeliver here at Rival IQ. So I know we promised 5 key takeaways, but that wasn't going to be nearly enough. So scratch that. I really hope to actually hit more like 11 key points in going through the report with you today. Now, of course, this is live. I'm sitting here in what is sunny Seattle, Washington with you at 10 in the morning. And so if you have questions as we go, please do pop them in the chat. My teammate Maria is producing behind the scenes. She's feeding them to me on Slack over here. So when we get done at the end, I will very much flip through and see how much time we have to answer questions. But please do ask away and I will do my best to get to them. If we run out of time, which is a decent likelihood, then we'll do our best to follow up on things that we can. All right, with that, let's just get right into it. The Social Media Industry Benchmark Report is our big annual report that we publish every winter here at Rival IQ. We sample over 2,100 companies from 14 different industries, looking at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. This year, of course, for us, the big ad was TikTok, bringing TikTok into the mix as well. And in this report, from those brands that we sampled across those industries, we're mixing together data from millions of Facebook posts, Instagram posts, tweets, and now TikToks, covering billions of engagements on that content to bring you answers about median performance, activity, engagement rates, etc., broken down industry by industry. Of course, if you actually have already read the report, I hope you have. You've sort of gotten access to that data and a bunch of the takeaways that our team had from looking at that. Right up front, we do give you 5 key takeaways in the report. You've already read the report. I'm not even going to really try to give you these 5 today. We're going to try to look at how the data that we see in our benchmark report interacts with other benchmarking that we're doing throughout the year, looking at private data on other channels. I will definitely be referencing other reports during this time together today to give you some additional takes that I believe are important to help you in your understanding of how these benchmarks should affect your interpretation of your own data as well. Of course, don't take it from me. We got lots of coverage on the report this year, lots of takes, other people's takes on the data that we published this year. Social Media Today, Search Engine Land, Fast Company, Matt Navarra, and others definitely sharing it out with their own spin on things. So be sure to check some of that out as well. But enough upfront stuff. Let's really get into it. The first thing I want to clarify upfront. Let's use a little math. I know this is a bad way to start any talk. It's like, let's look at math. But there's always confusion around what it is we're actually benchmarking. And so in this report, we are benchmarking engagement rates per follower on a per post basis. So that is saying how much engagement do you get on a post and how many followers did that particular account have. That at the time that they published it. That produces something that we call the engagement rate. We can, of course, look at this on a post by post basis. What we do in this report is look at that number in aggregate for any brand across the entire year time period. So in this case, the 2022 calendar year. And then we sort of stack those numbers up company by company to find the median performance for any brand in an industry or without regard to industry to get some of our cross industry numbers. So this has nothing to do with impressions or anything else. This is using publicly available data. We call it our public data here at Rival IQ. So it does not use any authenticated connections. It doesn't look at impressions or reach or anything else. It's just using followers as the denominator. So just so we're all on the same page. What did we see this year? Instagram which is typically our top performing channel, came in at about 0.47% for that number. Facebook, dramatically lower than Instagram at 0.06%, Twitter at 0.035%, you know, in past years, this is where we would stop. We tend to only benchmark these 3 channels, and we have been, I don't even know if this was year 7 or year 8. It's been a very long time that we've been publishing these results. But this year, new kid on the block, we brought TikTok into the mix. And what we saw is that the median engagement rate per follower on the TikTok videos that were included in the study was much, much higher than any of these channels, 5.69%. So it's hard to see the relationship there. Let's put it in graph form. And you see that there is absolutely an enormous discrepancy between what we're seeing from TikTok with respect to engagement rates, more than 12x better than what we see on Instagram, which is then itself 8 to 10x bigger and better than what we see on Facebook and Twitter. So this leads me to first takeaway, which is, with the exception of TikTok, engagement rates by follower count on these big 3, you know, our traditional big 3 social networks are relatively small. And this is something that folks have been saying for a while, but small is a very relative term, of course. And so I think it's important to qualify, like, what is small. So right up front, I reminded you again that all of these numbers were computed on the basis of followers. And we all know that not every one of your followers is going to see every post. And so we already giving you a hint as to where we're going with this. But what does small really mean? Like these sub 1% numbers, again, with the exception of TikTok, what does that mean? So here's a little bit of benchmarking data from Campaign Monitor. A lot of us are marketers and work in many digital medium. So take email, where Campaign Monitor tells us, 21% is your average open rate, click-through rates in the 2 to 3% range, and click-to-open rates north of 10%, right? So if you work in email marketing, these might feel like pretty normal numbers. Then you start to talk about these social media numbers that are sub 1% or sub 0.1% in the case of Facebook and Twitter, and all of a sudden, like, yes, relatively, these numbers are pretty small. Now, this year, for the first time, right in the report, we actually showed you some of how these numbers are trending over time. We've done this as sort of a one-off in the past, but this year we felt like let's give everybody the numbers right up front. And I'm going to start here with Instagram, that 0.47 kind of there on the right. That is a bit of a drop from last year. In fact, it's a 29% drop from last year. We sat here together about a year ago having a similar conversation, looking at that 0.67 number and talking about how that was a 30% drop from the prior year as well. And of course, 2 years back, same conversation. So we have definitely seen Instagram trending down with respect to engagement rates, double-digit percentage, 20 to 30% year over year for the last several years. If we push this graph back further, I remember when the number was 1.67 or 1.7 and beyond. So definitely, it's been a steady decline. It makes sense. Organic reach doesn't earn a lot of money for platforms. Certainly, monetization is important if you own a social media network, as we've seen in the news all too much recently. So declining engagement rates over time is probably to be expected. For Facebook, the declines have been less precipitous. We've been under 0.1% for now the last 4 years. Not a ton of decline here in the last year or so for Facebook, from about 0.064 to 0.06 or something like that. And on Twitter, again, small declines, but relatively flat for the last few years. If you'd like to compare these drops, I'm going to redraw these graphs here and kind of normalize the 2019 numbers so that you think about that as the baseline, and then we can see how much folks have declined. Year over year, you see that actually Instagram has experienced the most precipitous declines since the 2019 study, or the 2019 calendar year data. So over the last 4 years, when compared to Facebook and Twitter. And so my big takeaway here for you is that your average engagement rates are being driven down, at least in part by declining reach. And I think it's important to kind of internalize these numbers and these concepts. Even if you're growing your account, you are constantly fighting against the declining organic reach. And that's going to be true on all of these networks. And so you've got to make sure you've got good data to be able to understand your own performance, and also to be able to tell the story of your own performance to your clients or to your leadership, because you're definitely fighting an upwind battle. Now, my other kind of 2A here is that Instagram has always experienced, or at least in the last 4 years, has experienced the largest relative decline in engagement, and that does continue to be true this year. So if you're sitting around and saying, well, my Instagram numbers were down last year, or they weren't what I expected, and that was the place where I felt like we took the biggest kind of gut punch, you would be right. Now, we haven't really gotten into this yet, but if you're sitting there at home, you might be much like younger Jon Stewart here asking why. And so let's get into it. And because Instagram was the place that we saw the biggest decline, let's spend some time talking a little bit more about Instagram. Not to worry, if you're here to listen to me talk about TikTok, I definitely have some good stuff coming in a bit, but let's just get into the Instagram piece a little bit more. So return with me to the formula that we started with. Engagement rate per follower is our total engagements divided by our followers, and the followers here are really the key concept, because who's going to see your Instagram content most of the time, or who is most likely to see your Instagram content? It's certainly your followers, but we have to ask all these questions about your followers, like, hey, those followers that you got 5 years ago, do they even still use social media at all anymore? Or if they do use it, how regularly do they log on? And if they're there, do they engage with your content? And have they recently engaged with your content? All of these questions are coded into the algorithms of these platforms, right? And so if someone has been shown your content 75 times over the last year and they've not liked any of the posts or commented, and they've not stopped scrolling and they haven't watched your videos, that's a signal to Instagram that maybe they don't like you that much anymore. And so maybe they shouldn't spend that impression showing your content. This is not nice to think about, but it's certainly the reality. And so, can you check the box on all of these questions? And if you can, you're much more likely to reach those users that follow you. And if you can't check all these boxes, we're starting to get to this place of understanding why engagement rates might be declining, because reach might be declining. So let's actually talk about reach a little bit more. This is not something we publish about in our benchmark report, but at least for Instagram, it is something that we publish annually about. And so I want to bring in more math. I know it's early in the morning for us West Coast folks to be talking about math, but let's bring another formula in here. Let's talk about post reach rate. And that is, on average, what's the reach you're earning for any given post divided by how many followers you have. So you have 100 followers, you reach 20 of them, that's 20%. If I give you a bigger number, if you have 100,000 followers, maybe a more realistic example, and you reach 20,000 of them with a post, we would call that 20%. So we benchmark this concept every year as a part of our Instagram Stories benchmark report. And though we call it the Instagram Stories benchmark report, we also benchmark this for the feed as well. And in this graph, I'm showing you a slide right out of the most recent Instagram Stories benchmark report that we published in early January. What I've got up on the screen right now is looking at that post reach rate for a bunch of different follower buckets. So small accounts on the left, less than 10,000 followers, larger accounts greater than 200,000 followers on the right, and some kind of mid-sized tiers in between. So what we saw from our 2021 data, so now 2 years back, is we had the smaller accounts with post reach rates in the 17 to 20% range, and the larger accounts kind of nearing the 10% range. In 2022, the data that we just published a month ago or 2 months ago, we saw drops for every one of these groups. And if I throw the percentages up so that you don't have to do head math, we can see that for all of these account sizes, save the smallest accounts, we saw massive drops in our post reach rate numbers, about 40%, regardless of the size of your account. And so leads me to my next big takeaway, which is, at least on Instagram, declining organic reach is a big factor in the declines that we're seeing in engagement rate in our social media benchmark report. Now, reach is one factor, and if you aren't reaching people, certainly they can't like it. But the other question that you would want to ask is, when you do publish content, do people like what they see? Is your content good? And has it been consistently good? And that could be a factor in terms of declining engagement as well, as could a million other things like changes to the UI or new surface areas, whatever. But like, let's focus on this one for a moment, just on the feed. Certainly it's a place where a lot of content still gets published. And we do have a metric for helping us understand this, which is something we call engagement rate per impression. So this is now looking at how much engagement do you get as a function of how many people actually saw your content. It's a really good metric for understanding the quality of your content. If someone saw it, did they choose to take the time to like, comment, share, whatever? Let's jump back to that Instagram Stories benchmark report that we published earlier this year. Included there is data about this exact concept broken down in a few ways. What I'm showing here is again, the same 4 audience size buckets, smaller accounts on the left, larger accounts on the right, and asking that question, on average, how many likes, comments, and saves do we see per impression on a post? And that number is in the 5 to 6% range, slightly higher for the smaller accounts, slightly smaller for the lower accounts, but more or less, you can put that in your head, it's kind of 5 or 6%. That number has been pretty consistent in this report for the last several years. This year was a little bit shocking because we actually saw declines here. So on the smaller accounts, all the way down to 5%, and then at the larger ones, it drops from 5% down to about 3.8%. So now instead of thinking, oh, I've told people for years, oh, 5 to 6%, if you want to hold a number in your head, 5.5%, it's a great number to kind of hold in your head. This year, what the data is showing us is that that number is more like 4 to 5%. And I was honestly surprised to see that drop. And so now, we're playing 5 whys, like what, okay, now what happened? And the number one thing that I kind of jumped to from a theory perspective is maybe it's the format. Instagram has very much been pushing Reels in the last year plus and has been consistently toying with the different media types and ways that we can publish to the feed over the last several years. So if you think about, we used to have posts and carousels, we had short form video, then IGTVs as a form of long form, and now they've mixed IGTV and video together into a single format. And of course now we have Reels as an additional thing to think about as well. And in this battle for attention with TikTok, certainly lots of people asking, hey, is Reels earning more reach or something like that? And so I wouldn't be bringing it up if I didn't have some data to share with you, of course. So again, this coming right out of our Instagram Stories benchmark report a few months ago, we've got this post reach rate data broken down on this slide by those different post types. So carousels, images, videos, and Reels. And now I just chose to show the 2022 data straight away here. And what you would see is on average across all account sizes that Reels are earning more reach than all of these other media types. So, comparing 10% to 14%, that's a pretty dramatic improvement in what you can earn reach-wise on average when choosing to publish Reels versus some of these other content types. Now, let me layer in the data from the previous year so that we can get a little bit more context. Has that always been true? At least over the last 2 years, more or less, yes. But it's the case that the difference in 2021 wasn't so dramatic, right? We're talking about 18% versus 16, 15, 16% for carousels. So in this past year, it's become a sharper difference between those two, but that everyone, all these media types lost in this past year, and Reels was not left out of that drop either. So from almost 18% down to 14% in the last year. Of course, other media types appear to have taken farther falls, like the amount of reach that that images and carousels received was a bigger decline. And so the takeaway that I want you to walk away with here is that, I just said it, I'll say it again, Reels are better on average at earning reach on a per follower basis than the other media types you have available to you on Instagram right now. And so it's not that people's content necessarily got worse, but if you can imagine a shift from one content type to another, particularly if they have different engagement behaviors, that could be a driver. And so I have to keep going here now and asking, okay, media type has potentially shifted. We see that reach on a media type basis has shifted, but do people engage with what they see? And how does that vary, whether it's an image or a carousel or video, reel, whatever. So once again, let's look at the data. This is the data from 2022. And what we see is that on a per impression basis, reels and videos actually earn fewer engagements on a per impression basis. So if someone's watching a reel, even if more people are seeing it, they are less likely to interact with it than what we see for images and carousels, where that number tends to be almost 5%, 4.7%. Video is the lowest. That's been true for a long time. And reels slightly higher, but still quite a bit off from the other two. If I show you year over year how those numbers have changed, we see a drop for images, carousels, and videos, but the decline for reels between the 2021 data and now the 2022 data is relatively small. It was 3.9, moving down to 3.7. So you might be holding a lot of that in your head. Let me try to put it together here, which is reels may be earning fewer engagements per impression when you compare it to, say, carousels or photos. The increased reach that you're getting from the reels likely offsetting that, and will probably end up yielding overall more engagement for you. And so I'll tie back to one of the takeaways that we actually published in the report was every brand should be posting reels or really figuring out how to incorporate reels as a part of your strategy. Certainly if you're not on TikTok already, plenty of brands are, many brands still are not. I realize it's quite a commitment to be creating content for TikTok. And if you think about those kinds of videos, what's working well on TikTok carries over very well into Reels. It is an investment and it is a choice that might be one that you might not be able to make from an investment perspective, but certainly considering the experimentation that might let you figure out, is this something that's going to help me be more successful, is one I would strongly recommend making. Okay, that was a lot of math. We're like 20 some minutes in here, and just give you a chance to breathe, pause before we do a bit more. I want to bring back this slide that I showed earlier and really reflecting on the fact that TikTok, benchmarking TikTok in this report in this way is something we have not added before. And you might be sitting here looking at that 12x engagement rate per follower gap and asking yourself a question, which is how they do that. Like how is it, what's happening over there? We just went through quite an exposition on Instagram to explore a few different theories around reach, around content quality, around media type. And I want to do a bit of that with you now, looking at TikTok as well. So you have a little bit more of an understanding about how it is that the numbers are the way that they are. Now, of course, there's only really, at least for the purposes of this report, there's really one media type that we're going to be studying, which is videos. We're talking about stories or nows or whatever other things are happening on TikTok at this exact moment. But that leaves us with two theories to sort of explore. One is more reach, at least on a per follower basis, or better content. So let's start on the left and talk about reach. I want to start to share some data with you today that's actually not published in this report at all, but it's really useful for helping us understand these things. So here's your, thanks for attending today. Here's your extra nuggets of data that you haven't found anywhere else yet because we haven't published them, but I'm sharing with you in this moment. I wanted to go look at this metric and say, on average, over the entirety of the year, for each of these brands that ended up getting indexed into the study, how were they earning views? What did their views look like relative to their followers? And the number across the entire study turned out to be 134%, which, if you kind of pause for a moment, that's a big number. And if you compare that to the benchmark that I just gave you off of Instagram, at least for Reels, that number was like 17% or something like that. So this is a much bigger number in terms of reaching relative to the size of your account. And that's tremendous. And I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about what I think is actually happening. I'll show you some data where I believe what's happening there. But that's a big number. And so you might want to stop and pause on this takeaway, which is the average brand on TikTok is going to likely earn much higher views per follower than on other platforms. And while that might not be true for every single video across a good time period where you have an increased chance to go viral because of the FYP, because of the algorithm on TikTok, certainly there's a shot to gain a lot more attention here for smaller accounts, much bigger than the following you might have. So let's explore the other side here, because there's two theories and we need to sort of piece it all together and make sure that we get to the right answer and not just an answer. The other question I had was, is it better content? Like, is the content that the brands are making on TikTok just that much better and engaging audiences that see it so much more? And so to do this, we're going to use a metric, which is looking at, on average for a brand, how much engagement do they generate on a per view basis, right? So if 100 people see your video and 10 of them like it, that would be 10%. And if you do that across the entirety of the year, what do we see? So here's another benchmark out of this study that, again, we didn't publish, but I'm sharing with you now, which is that number, the median brand across the entire study, produces a result that's about 4.5%. And so to bring back that benchmark from our Instagram data a moment ago, this is the Instagram Reels number for engagement per impression. So I'm equating views and impressions here. Forgive me, it's close enough for the purposes of our kind of journey today. It's about 3.7%. So maybe it's slightly higher on TikTok. What is that? I don't know, 20%, 30%, something like that. But it's not what we're seeing over there on the left, right? It's not a 8x, 7x, 8x. And so my walk away from this and my takeaway is that, yeah, those engagement per view numbers or impression numbers are roughly similar. Like, they're close enough in terms of the content. While I enjoy watching TikTok and I find it highly engaging, it's not that much bigger than what we're seeing on Instagram. And that rather, I'll give you takeaway 7A here, reach beyond your followers. That is the chance to go viral because of the For You page algorithm. That's the driver of high engagement rates on a per follower basis on TikTok, right? That 134% on average. Again, that is the mean. If I look at all the views and all the followers from all the posts across an entire year, again, it's not that every view is reaching that, but that each brand or many brands go viral in a big way each year, enough that it really skews that number upward. I think if I didn't do the work to bring you the median for that number, but we did that in a different study last year, and the median was pretty equivalent to what we're seeing on Instagram, 15 to 20%. So the explanation of how you get from 15 or 20% to 130% is a few times a year going massively viral and getting a ton of views is a big driver for reaching a lot more folks. I've referenced several times in going through this 2022 TikTok benchmark report that we did. I've just showed a few slides here just to give you some flavor. I'm not gonna actually talk through them, but this report is wonderful. It actually takes each of the metrics that we do in our social media benchmark report, these metrics I just shared with you, so these views per follower and engagement per view numbers, and it breaks them down, gives you the distributions of how we see these. It breaks it down by industry, it breaks it down by account size. Fantastic report. I think my teammate Maria will share that in the chat, so you can get a link to all these reports for additional analytics, geek out fun as reader or exercise for the reader, but a lot more to learn there. Methodology slightly different in that report, looking more at median performance as opposed to this kind of average mean, which tends to get skewed upward by like brands going viral, for example. So not directly comparable to everything I've shared with you today, but as a self-contained study, certainly very informative as well. So I encourage you to go read. Okay, Now we're half an hour in, and we have looked a lot at the median performance, right? We're talking about being in the middle. And I find that that's a very useful concept because you want to know if you're kind of in the top performers, roughly speaking, or in the bottom performers. But I think it's also useful to ask a different question, which it can illuminate some different perhaps behaviors or research angles for us. And that is to ask the question, okay, fine, median, but who did well? Like, where are the top performers and where can we look for inspiration and guidance, or where can we explain performance because there's a correlation to something else? And I want to answer this question in a few different ways for you this morning. The first is to just look at the various industries and see how they perform relative to one another across each of these channels. And I've started here with Instagram, and the top 4 industries in this year's study were higher ed, sports teams, influencers, and nonprofits, all of whom are performing, the median brand in those industries performing above the median of all brands in the study. If I bring in Twitter, you're going to see roughly the same set again: sports, higher ed, nonprofits. Alcohol pops in there. Facebook, again, highly overlapping: sports, influencers, higher ed, alcohol. And finally, TikTok, not surprisingly, higher ed, sports teams, travel, and nonprofits. And I threw a little asterisk by nonprofits because I think it was a tie with financial services. And from looking at a lot of the financial services data, I think boosting played a really big role in some of the performance for financial services brands that were in the index, as opposed to not so much in a lot of these other things. So I chose to give nonprofits the nod here. I love nonprofits. So there you go. We'll talk about them a little bit more. If I show you though how all these top industries changed year over year, everyone's seeing decline. Now, those declines are, with a few exceptions, not nearly as big as what we saw for the overall study, right? Like higher ed had a 14% decline. That's certainly much smaller than the 29-30% decline we saw for the average brand in the study. Same thing goes for sports and influencers, and maybe nonprofits took a pretty hard hit on Instagram last year. But same story across these other channels. And I don't have year-over-year data for you on TikTok because this is the first year. Next year, when you join me in March for this same walkthrough, I hope to be able to have that data for you as well. But my big takeaway looking at this slide is really that, look, the top industries on social, they're going to be on top, and it doesn't really matter the channel. And that very much has to do with the inherent nature of the kinds of content that are available, or the kinds of emotions or drive that these like, think about nonprofits, right? Like a lot of people very much are passionate about causes. That is going to drive high alignment to these organizations and spreading the messages that they're sharing on social media. Higher ed has lots of different audiences, all of whom are excited. Sports, you could say the same thing. So if you work in one of these industries, like, good luck. I mean, not good luck. You're lucky, because it's not that your job's easy, but certainly there's a real natural alignment to the kinds of content that people like to engage with and share on social media. And so the bar's higher. If you start thinking about benchmarking yourself, if you're in one of these industries, don't think about our all up numbers as a good enough benchmark, right? Think about your industry numbers. If you're in higher education, the bar's pretty high. There are a lot of engaged audiences and a lot of really talented marketers who work in higher education. And so the numbers are bigger. Make sure you find the right benchmark. Okay, so we looked at industries, but let's return to the question and talk a little bit more about who did well. But now let's change gears in a few different ways. One, let's go back and talk about TikTok a little bit more. And then two, I actually want to go down and actually look at like a single brand and talk a little bit more about some of the things that I think that they're doing that help them be successful on TikTok. So flash back up for you here those same top industries on TikTok. So higher ed, sports teams, travel, and nonprofits. And I flipped my magic four-sided coin that doesn't really exist to come up with travel. as the place that I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about today. Travel's had a rough, well, over the last, call it since the start of the pandemic, travel's had a rough go. We saw travel brands absolutely get crushed at the beginning of the pandemic. You think about March, April 2020, lockdowns, et cetera. So many of our clients who either work in or around travel, both brands and agencies, tremendously affected. Of course, many things have returned from a travel perspective, and so travel did pretty well this year on TikTok, which is just another data point about the various ways in which the world is at least trying its best to return to some sense of normalcy. TikTok and travel, not a lot of content being published, only about 1.5 posts per week for that median brand, but yet decently high engagement. The brand, I went through and ranked all of the brands that were here, and I'm looking for brands that put up decently big numbers from an engagement and views perspective, but also who did pretty well in that engagement per view metric. You know, I want to know somebody who puts up big numbers, but also has good content. I want to filter out people who are boosting too much, or have just put out so many videos that they may get a lot of engagement, but on average, their videos aren't that good. And the brand that I chose to share with you a little bit more about today was the Yacht Week. So if you don't know about the Yacht Week, I certainly did not know about the Yacht Week before I started my my bit of a journey here. This is a wonderful vacation option in the Mediterranean. You want to go rent a yacht with some of your friends that's captained, and you sail around the coast of Croatia or Greece, and it's like a floating party every night. It looks tremendous for people who are half my age. Maybe one day when the kids are out of the house, we'll consider the Yacht Week as an amazing looking vacation. But they have a pretty tremendous account going here. Small, about 66,000 followers or so, but they do a few things that I think they're doing really well, and I want to talk about those a little bit more. So first up, let's just look at their numbers. They saw steady follower growth throughout last year, and they published pretty consistently about 6 videos a week, a little bit more than 6 videos a week. So again, if I compare that for you, for that travel benchmark, it's only 1.5 videos per week. These folks are very committed to the account. One thing we know about TikTok is TikTok likes to be fed, and fed consistently. Honestly, not that different from Instagram or some of the other platforms. And the Yacht Week has clearly chosen from a strategic perspective to make that something that they deliver on. Now, what they got for that was really quite high engagement rate on a per follower basis, 17% last year when compared with the 7.43% that we saw on average for the travel brands in the study. Now, I know it's small and I didn't blow it up here, so I apologize, but that little spark line that shows us how their engagement rate went sort of week by week over the year, you see some spikes, and those spikes are really big. And it turns out, as I was saying earlier, that the chance for any brand, big or small, to have a video that takes off and earns a tremendous amount of reach at any point in time is much higher than we've seen on other platforms. And so all of those various spikes that happened for them organically throughout the year really did drive and skewed their overall number quite high. Again, they're not earning 17% on every single video, but there are videos where that number is many orders of magnitude higher than what they see for their average video, and it pulls up what we think their overall impact was for the year. And then the final number I wanted to share that I think is worth noting for a brand like this as well is their engagement rate on a per view basis was 7.63%. That's high. Across the entire study, we saw 4.52%. And if you went and dug into that distribution data I was talking about earlier, there aren't that many brands that can consistently over an entire year period earn engagement rates on a per view basis. So does your content resonate? Do people consistently like, comment, share on your content? And the answer for the Yacht Week is absolutely yes, very much. So they're doing some things right. Let's look at the content that they're actually putting out. So these are their top 8 posts by engagement for 2022, calendar 2022. And the first thing you probably notice stylistically is that they use this long text overlay as a creative choice. This is obviously very popular on TikTok. We see a lot of it around, and for them, I mean, every single one of their posts, maybe except for that second post with the face, another popular meme trend on TikTok, graphically use that style. So other things that they did well, they very much are on the sound trends. And so, this was like March last year. They very much were on it. And some of their other top videos were also, again, being on trend with sounds that were particularly particularly popular. Humor is big for them. So like both of these videos had definitely a funny angle to it. You see it in the content. Of course, if you read the comments, you also walk away with like a sense that people like engaging with their content. And so, sounds, trends, memes, and then the other bucket of content for them that they do really well with is sort of this aspirational content. Even though they're doing the long text overlay thing, they're walking through and showing just capture after capture of all the tremendous, shore visits you're going to take or amazing things that happen on the boat, etc. So they're mixing a combination of being on trend, being consistent, publishing a lot of content, and then humor and aspiration blended together. And it's yielded really good results for them. In aggregate, over the entirety of last year, they earned over 30 million views and almost 2.5 million total engagements. So nice job to the team from the Yacht Week. I don't know them. I would like to know them to go on a fancy boat, but I don't think that's in the cards for me just yet. What's my takeaway? Knowing what creates a response from your audience, right? For them, it happened to be humor, mixing humor and aspiration, and again, doing TikTok-like things on TikTok and doing them consistently is going to yield above average results, both for your engagement, for a lot of your diagnostic metrics like engagement per view, et cetera. These are the secrets for it. It's not really a secret, but like these are the secrets for success. Since I was talking about travel and I ended up looking at quite a lot of brands over the last few days to figure out who I really wanted to talk about, here are some other accounts that I think, if you're curious, hey, who else is a good example? VRBO, Ibiza Rocks, Travelers with Cause, and EasyJet are all examples of account that have similar properties to what I shared about the Yacht Week. So these are brands that put up decently big numbers, but also consistent quality numbers. We see high engagement per view, which for me is a big signal to almost certainly how little that they're boosting and how much they're doing this on an organic basis. So there's a few more accounts you can check out if you're interested. And I see over here on my side screen that I'm getting the, hey Doc, you've been going for a long time here. We're about out of time. And so I do want to wrap up and see what questions we have, but I want to leave you with a few points of advice, at least from somebody who studies these things a lot, which is you've got to study the platforms you use. Know what it takes to drive engagement on these platforms. Know what the people who run the algorithms are looking for and the kinds of behaviors they're trying to achieve with their users. And you kind of have to align to that. So if you can know why TikTok works the way it works and what you can expect from that, know what Instagram, how they want you to use it, where they want you to be spending your time, what kind of content they want you to be creating, you kind of need to do it if you want to be successful. You're going to know if you're successful because you're benchmarking your metrics, and that's going to help you focus on where you're doing well and where you have opportunities to improve. And then finally, take the time to step back, get your data, build your strategy in a way that will let you have measurable outcomes that you can return to 90 days from now, 180 days from now, and go back and say, okay, we saw this opportunity, we made these changes, did it work? And I believe that if you do all these things and are paying a lot of attention, you will get there. All right, that was fun. My screen is telling me that was 97 builds. That's a lot of slides. I'm going to stop, but let's jump over here and see what questions we have. I only have a few minutes here, so let's see what we've got going on. I'm going to just pause and read because I can't talk and read at the same time. Okay, Wendy asked a question about the Yacht Week. So the brand the product clearly aligned to a demographic. That is what I think most of us think about as being the core demographic on TikTok, right? So this is folks in their, teens and 20s, like, maybe younger millennials, older Gen Z, down and down. And I think you're probably right that there is a high alignment there. And so that's certainly going to be helpful for them. But I think I showed you a few other travel brands in there as well, like VRBO. I can't bring myself to say Vrbo. Am I supposed to say Vrbo? I don't think of that as a brand that's at all, Gen Z focused. That's very much feels like an everyone brand, just like Airbnb and some other things in that space. And they've also done tremendously well. EasyJet, sort of same thing. I mean, maybe budget airlines are more skewed demographically younger, but I don't think you're wrong in asserting that there are, just like there are industries where I think social media tends to perform better. I think, yes, there are going to be products that have a much more natural alignment to the audience, and folks there still need to do a good job executing, but I think there are brands that can do incredibly well by hitting on some of the other properties that people who are on TikTok find compelling. Humor is certainly one of them. Cute feel good is also another place. One of the brands that I was kind of reviewing in the last few days in the travel space that had my eye was, I think it's called the Peabody Hotel, or the Peabody, which is a hotel in Memphis or in Tennessee. And they have a tradition of having their like ducks march through the lobby. It's like this 100-year-old tradition that derived from, I don't remember what, to be honest, some guy marching ducks through the lobby. Well, it turns out that like ducks marching through a hotel lobby really kill on TikTok. And they absolutely crushed it for the first half of last year, unveiling so much content of kids and ducks marching, like people like cute, entertaining things, and the proof's kind of in the data. Looking at the rest of the marketing from that brand, there's nothing about Gen Z. It's lots of curly writing and things that look like it might appeal to my folks, but still did quite well on TikTok in terms of gaining lots of audience, lots of impressions, lots of engagement. So definitely think it's not over for brands who don't have a naturally aligned product for folks in that demographic. All right, let's see. What else do we have? Andrew asks, so if we think about different content types on Instagram, should I think about Reels as maybe a place to get more reach, and images and carousel are for engagement? That's a hard question, Andrew. I don't think it's really necessarily that cut. I don't think it's really that cut and dry. I think that depending on the kind of content you have, there are going to be things that perform great in a carousel. Carousels always tend to do well, partially because if you know what you're doing in terms of building up your frames and understanding that people who pass by your content once and don't engage very likely will get served the second frame. And so getting another bite at the apple, as it were, like understanding that helps drive impressions on those posts. And people tend to, as we saw, hit like or comment more on non-real content. But all of this is about earning reach. All of this is about trying to figure out which customers are most aligned, or which prospects, or who in your audience is most aligned with your brand. And so I would hope that the goal is really to try to reach them and get engagement however you can. You are more likely to get reach on Reels. Part of that is, some setting in the Instagram algorithm somewhere, but also part of that is what Instagram's doing with Reels that hasn't been as true with posts, which is to sort of put your content into the pool, right? And let people who are just scrolling Reels, independent of who they follow, giving you a bite at more things, more views, more impressions. It's not that hasn't been true through Discover, through hashtag following and some other things on Instagram over the last few years, but they've turned it up on Reels, right? They're trying to create a TikTok-like experience. At least in my opinion, they're trying to create a TikTok-like experience, which is I never go to my following tab on TikTok because I get a nice mixture of people I've never seen, people I also follow tend to just show up in my FYP. I think they really nailed it on that experience. And so I don't know that it's an either or. Let's see who else has got here. So Serena is asking, well, she asked, why do I think engagement rate is highest on TikTok? I feel like I spent 15 minutes on that, so I'm not going to won't go back to that again, other than more reach. But secondarily, if the US is successful in banning TikTok, what can that mean for the other platforms? Wow, we'd have to do a whole nother show on what I think about that. I don't think the US is actually going to ban TikTok. I think that's the long and short of it. I mean, I think certain states have issued rules about what government officials can do, et cetera. A lot of concern about data sharing. Like I get it, but I think we have debt limits and other things to worry about. I don't know that banning TikTok is really going to actually gain any traction. I think it's good. I think it's good talking points. I think if TikTok actually got banned, yeah, let's not even get into it. I don't even know. Jennifer asks, Instagram talked more about putting emphasis back on photos versus reels, and do I think this will change the data for the next year? You know, Instagram, all of us who work in social media, right? We're thinking a lot about managing accounts for our clients, for business, mostly for business or for business accounts. And we've heard a lot about, emphasis back on friends and family. If you feel like you're constantly being monetized through advertising, there are lots of brand accounts. So many of you out there do amazing jobs running brand accounts that are entertaining, informative. Like I follow all kinds of brand accounts. It can be good. And so if Instagram truly does think that people are more likely to put out post short form video as opposed to like trying to publish reels, like most people are not trying to go viral, right? They're just trying to share pictures, engagement with their friends. So I'm gonna bet that we see a little bit of shift from a business account reach perspective back toward photos and carousels versus reels. But I can tell you, so many more brands are now investing in TikTok than a year ago. A year ago, we weren't talking about these things in this report. And in all the industry benchmarking we did in 2022, we added TikTok. And the reason was enough brands were there and doing meaningful work on TikTok such that we felt like it was time to start adding it to all of our benchmarking reports. That same thing was not true in 2021. We would go through and look at all the brands that we use in our various indices to do this work, and there weren't enough brands doing the work. So now imagine you've got brands doing the work, and so many folks have made that investment for that additional person or additional creatives on their team to be doing the TikTok work. A lot of it does play really well when repurposed on Reels, whether it's Instagram Reels or Facebook Reels or YouTube Shorts. And yes, maybe Instagram is doing, looking for watermarks and downgrading reach on videos that feel like reshared in that way. But I study a lot of brands for a lot of different industries over the year, and I would say a consistent pattern that I see is that winners on TikTok, like content that is a winner on TikTok, like this brand X, their best content on the year from TikTok were these posts. Derivatives of those posts or the exact same posts themselves ended up being winners on other channels as well. And so as much as it's hard to get from not creating Reels or TikToks to creating Reels or TikToks, once you've made that leap, you might as well, make hay with it. And I see brands doing that on Instagram. So I think if there is a shift, it'll be subtle, but that's the fun of this work that we do, is coming back and being able to actually get the data and answer the question and let you know how it's going. And for those of you who are playing along at home with your own RivalIQ accounts, obviously being able to do that in your own numbers as you go is certainly the quickest, easiest way to get to those answers for yourself as well. All right, Maria's telling me we're out of time. Folks, this was really fun for me. I wish we could all be in a big room together and kind of laugh and joke together. Obviously, GoToWebinar doesn't really allow for that, but I appreciate all of you hanging with me for the last hour or so. It's been really fun. Write in, let us know what other questions you have. And otherwise, thanks for joining me today on the Data Driven Marketer. We'll see you in the next month or so when I think we talk about the beauty industry. So have a good rest of your March, folks. Bye.